if you book one big fight, there's things that come from that. By example, at 155 pounds, I love the idea. I love the idea of Volk stepping in, getting the fight that he wanted, getting the fight that he earned. Right? It was stated that when Volk and Islam got done the first time, it was stated if we're going to rematch this, Volk needs to win his next fight, who was scheduled against Rodriguez. Islam needs to win his next fight, which was rumored to be against Charles. That wasn't actually booked. I did everything I could do to have them not book that fight. At any rate, Volk did his part. Volk qualifies for Islam. Volk came out and did an interview about a month ago. He said, man, I'm not waiting. If I do the Islam gimmick, I got to wait until April or May of next year. I want to fight right away. If I go to 45, take on Ilia Topuria, we can do it right away. I'm telling you guys, I'm stating the obvious for you hardcore fans, but I want to give a timeline in case I'm talking to some new fans. So, to see Volk get this opportunity is great. I would like to know how we got here, because we went with Volk and we went with Gamrot, and there was no speaking of Gaethje. So was the fight offered to Gaethje, and he didn't want it on short notice. He wasn't ready to go. He didn't want to go to Fight Island. He didn't want to be a backup fighter. None of those things at all. I don't know. I'm just saying I would like to know. I think that would be good drama, good gossip. I would be curious how that happened. Because if you skipped Gaethje already, not just once, you skipped him twice. You went with Gamrot and you went with Volk before you went to Gaethje. Why would we think that Gaethje is going to be next? How would that work? So as I'm trying to collect clues and get information, I'm just curious about that. Now, what do you do with Topuria, by the way? Does he fight for an interim belt? Does he fight Volk for the undisputed belt? I mean, a lot of these things can't be decided until this fight is over. We don't know if Volk's going to win. If Volk becomes champion at 155 pounds, I think it's very unlikely that he ever returns to 145. Nobody wants to cut weight. Nobody wants to cut more weight than necessary. Is why I bring that to you. So Topuria versus Volk is not guaranteed, and in many ways it's more likely than not to happen. Now, you can have your own opinion on that, but keep that in mind. Just keep that in mind, because that's an overlapping theme when you look at 185 pounds. And again, I tried to let you know, if you pass up an opportunity, you are very unlikely to get that opportunity again. And that has to do with 185 and Dricus du Plessis. As soon as he said no, right? As soon as that interview with Adesanya happened and he started thinking twice about it and said no, there was no guarantee. He was a number one contender, won a number one contenders match. But you have to hold them to it. It's your job now to scream from the rooftops that you were promised number one contendership and you expect that to be honored. Because as soon as Strickland goes in there with that opportunity and changes and shuffles the deck, you're very unlikely to get it. It was still possible because you're 185 pounds. And 185 pounds, there are some really good fighters, but they are interchangeable mediocrities. You got Adesanya, who's one of the biggest stars in the sport. You have Strickland, who is now risen to that ascent. And then you have a whole bunch of guys that are really good at fighting in front of nobody. And the reason that's relevant is du Plessis was still a live dog. Like, he was doing everything wrong, but everybody else was doing it wrong too. So he was still a very live dog to get that opportunity. Now we're in a situation where we don't have to wonder anymore. It's not going to be du Plessis. Du Plessis will get the call if and only if there's injuries, there's illness, we need you at short notice. There's now another fight that's been named number one contendership. Not to mention wherever the rankings are and wherever you even find that out, there's no way that Dricus is in front of Adesanya. So even if there was a last minute or a backup fighter, you're going to be looking to Adesanya. So it's just one of these spots. And I don't take a pleasure in this, by the way. I'm not giving Dricus a hard time. I love watching du Plessis fight. But it's more realistic now than it was prior to the announcement of Kamaru Usman versus Chimaev. It's more realistic now that du Plessis and Izzy get matched up. I was a little light on that idea, even though it wouldn't be a title fight. If Dricus said no when the world title was on the line, I thought that it was a little bit ambitious to think that we could present him with the exact same thing minus the top prize of the belt and still get him to say yes. So it's a curious spot, and nothing in this sport is done until it's done. Nothing. I think this might be one of the finer lessons anywhere. Kamaru Usman fought tooth and nail to get Chimaev, and he got picked over. Wasn't him. He was told he could have it. They couldn't agree on the weight class. It wasn't him. But he stayed true to it. He knew what time it was. He stayed in shape. Might have kept his mouth shut. He might not have been as vocal as I'd like to see a guy be. But he was still able to see the board, and he was still able to see there was something off with Paulo Costa and Chimaev from Jump Street. That fight was never going to happen. And who's to blame or whose side that was on, I can't really bring you that. Neither one of those guys wanted to fight each other. Neither one of those guys wanted that fight to happen. Kamaru Usman was able to see that. He was able to see something's going to happen. My phone's going to ring. The idea that I brought them in the first place is the best idea. And eventually I will prove it's the best idea. And when I prove it, when I call them, I don't get much for it. When I prove it because they're calling me, it's a great way to get a raise.